The sound of cattle lowing in the twilight should have been the only music Preston York expected to hear that evening in August of 1873. But instead a voice like honey and sunshine floated across the Arizona grasslands, stopping him dead in his tracks as he rode toward his herd just outside Holbrook. Preston pulled his horse to a halt, his hand instinctively moving to rest on his thigh as he listened. The voice belonged to a woman, and she was singing something he had never heard before, a melody that seemed to calm his usually restless cattle better than anything he had ever witnessed. The longhorns stood peacefully, some even lying down, their dark eyes fixed on the figure standing among them in a pale yellow dress that caught the last rays of the setting sun. He dismounted slowly, careful not to startle either the cattle or the mysterious singer. As he moved closer, leading his horse by the reins, he could make out the words now. She was singing about open skies and freedom, about finding home in the vast wilderness, and her voice carried a purity that made his chest tighten with an emotion he could not quite name. The woman had long auburn hair that fell past her shoulders, and she moved among his cattle with a grace that suggested she had done this before. She reached out to touch their flanks gently as she sang, and the animals responded to her touch as if she were some kind of miracle worker. Preston found himself captivated, and before he realized what he was doing, he opened his mouth and joined her song. His voice was rougher, weathered by years of shouting across the plains and breathing in dust, but somehow it blended with hers in a way that felt natural, inevitable even. The woman startled, spinning around to face him. Her eyes were wide, the color of summer moss, and for a moment they simply stared at each other across the backs of the cattle. Then, to his surprise, she did not stop singing. Instead, she smiled just slightly and continued the melody, watching him as he approached. Preston kept singing too, the words coming easier now as he moved closer. When they reached the end of the verse, they both fell silent, and the evening sounds of the prairie rushed back in, crickets and distant coyotes and the soft breathing of the cattle around them. "I apologize for trespassing on your land," the woman said, her voice just as lovely when she spoke as when she sang. "I did not mean any harm. I was walking back to town and heard your cattle, and I could not help myself." "No harm done," Preston replied, removing his hat in a gesture of respect his mother had drilled into him years ago. "In fact, I have never seen them so calm. You have a remarkable gift, miss." "Lillian Crawford," she said, extending her hand in a bold gesture that told him she was not from around here. Eastern women rarely shook hands with men they did not know. "I arrived in Holbrook 3 weeks ago from Boston." Preston took her hand, noting the calluses on her fingers. "Not a lady of leisure, then." "Preston York. I run the Circle Y Ranch about 5 miles north of here. What brings you all the way from Boston to Arizona Territory?" Lillian withdrew her hand and looked away, her expression growing guarded. "I needed a fresh start. My father passed last year, and there was nothing left for me in Boston. I heard they needed a schoolteacher here." "You are the new schoolteacher?" Preston felt his eyebrows rise. He had heard talk in town about the woman from back east who had taken the position, but no one had mentioned that she looked like an angel or sang like one either. "I am," Lillian said, lifting her chin as if expecting him to challenge her right to the position. "I know some folks think a woman alone has no business coming west, but I am perfectly capable of taking care of myself." Preston held up his hands in a peaceful gesture. "I meant no offense, Miss Crawford. Truth be told, I think it is brave. This land is not easy on anyone, let alone someone used to city life." Her expression softened slightly. "You have a beautiful herd. Longhorns, are they not? I have been reading everything I can about cattle ranching since I decided to come west. I wanted to understand the way of life here." They are, Preston confirmed, warming to her immediately. Most city folks look down on ranching as crude work, beneath them somehow. Been building this herd for 5 years now. Started with nothing but 50 head and a dream after the war ended. You fought in the war? Lillian asked, and he noticed she did not specify which side, which he appreciated. I did, he said simply, not wanting to elaborate. Those years were behind him, though they had shaped him in ways he was still discovering. But that is ancient history now. Tell me, where did you learn to sing like that? I have been working cattle for years, and I have never seen them respond to anyone the way they responded to you. Lillian's face lit up, and Preston felt his heart skip in a way that both alarmed and intrigued him. My mother taught me. She grew up on a farm in Ireland before coming to America. She always said that animals understood music better than words, that it spoke to something deeper than language. I have been singing to animals since I was a little girl. Well, your mother was a wise woman, Preston said. I could use someone with your talent during the next drive. We are moving part of the herd to the railroad in about 3 weeks, and keeping them calm is always the biggest challenge. The words were out before he fully thought them through, and he saw the surprise flash across Lillian's face. Are you offering me a job, Mr. York? Preston, please, he said, then realized how presumptuous that sounded. And I suppose I am, though I understand if you think it inappropriate. It just seems a shame to let a gift like yours go to waste. Lillian studied him for a long moment, and Preston had the uncomfortable feeling that she was seeing straight through to his soul. Finally, she said, I would need to ensure it did not interfere with my teaching responsibilities. School starts in 2 weeks. The drive will not be until after school has been in session for a bit, Preston said, his heart beating faster at the realization that she was actually considering his impromptu offer. And it would only be for about a week. The pay would be $30, same as I pay my regular hands. $30 is more than I make in a month teaching, Lillian said, her eyes widening. But Mr. York, Preston, I must be honest with you. I know nothing about cattle drives beyond what I have read in books. I would be more liability than help. You would not be expected to do the regular work, Preston assured her. Just sing to them when they get restless, help keep them calm. My men can handle everything else, and I would make sure you were safe and properly chaperoned. My foreman's wife, Rosa, could come along. She often does anyway, to cook for the crew. Lillian bit her lip, clearly torn. Preston found himself holding his breath, waiting for her answer. He told himself it was just about the cattle, about making the drive easier, but he knew that was not entirely true. There was something about this woman that called to him, something beyond her voice or her beauty. When they had sung together, even for those brief moments, he had felt a connection he had never experienced before. Let me think about it, Lillian said finally. It is all very sudden, and I need to consider whether it would be appropriate given my position in town. Of course, Preston said, trying not to let his disappointment show. Take all the time you need. In the meantime, you are welcome to visit the cattle whenever you like. They clearly appreciate your company, and I would not want to deny them that. Lillian laughed, a sound like water over stones, clear and bright. You are using your cattle to manipulate me, Mr. York. Is it working? Preston asked, allowing himself a small smile. Perhaps, Lillian admitted. But I really should be getting back to town before it gets full dark. My landlady, Mrs. Henderson, will worry. Let me ride you back, Preston offered immediately. It is not safe for a woman alone after dark, and it is on my way. Lillian looked like she wanted to refuse, but practicality won out. Thank you. That is very kind. Preston helped her up onto his horse, then swung up behind her. He tried not to notice how perfectly she fit against him, or how her hair smelled like lavender and sunshine. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the darkening sky painting everything in shades of purple and gold. "Why did you join my song?" Lillian asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "Most people would have just listened or perhaps interrupted me." Preston considered the question carefully. It felt like the natural thing to do. Like the song needed both our voices to be complete. I know that probably sounds foolish. "No," Lillian said softly. "It does not sound foolish at all. I felt the same way. Like our voices were meant to blend together." They rode the rest of the way without speaking, but the silence felt heavy with unspoken thoughts and possibilities. When they reached Hallbrook, Preston helped Lillian down in front of a neat little house on the edge of town. "Thank you for the ride," Lillian said, smoothing her skirt. "And for your offer, I will give it serious thought." "I hope you will," Preston said. Then, feeling bold, he added, "And even if you decide against the drive, I would like to see you again, Miss Crawford. Perhaps I could call on you sometime." Lillian's cheeks flushed pink in the lamplight spilling from the house. "I would like that, Preston. Perhaps Sunday afternoon. Mrs. Henderson allows me to receive visitors in the parlor after church." "Sunday afternoon it is," Preston agreed, his heart soaring. "Good night, Miss Crawford." "Good night, Preston. And please call me Lillian." Preston rode back to his ranch feeling like he was floating. He had come out to check on his cattle and ended up finding something he had not even known he was looking for. As he bedded down that night in his small ranch house, he could still hear Lillian's voice in his head, could still feel the way their voices had harmonized. The next few days passed in a blur of work. Preston had a ranch to run, cattle to tend, fences to mend, and a dozen other tasks that required his attention. But through it all, he found his thoughts drifting back to Lillian, to the way she had looked standing among his cattle with the sunset painting her hair copper, to the sound of her laughter. His foreman, Miguel Torres, noticed his distraction almost immediately. Miguel was a solid man in his 40s, someone Preston had fought alongside during the war and trusted implicitly. He had been with Preston from the beginning, when the Circle Y was just a dream and a piece of paper. "You have been smiling an awful lot these past few days, boss," Miguel observed on Thursday afternoon as they worked on replacing a section of fence. "Either you found gold or you met a woman." Preston felt heat creep up his neck. "Is it that obvious?" Miguel laughed, a deep rumbling sound. "To someone who has known you for 8 years. "Yes, so who is she?" "The new school teacher from Boston," Preston admitted. "Lillian Crawford. I found her singing to the cattle the other night, and Miguel, I have never heard anything like it. The Longhorns were calm as house cats." "Rosa mentioned her," Miguel said, hammering in another fence post. "Said she seems like a good woman. Smart, kind, but probably too refined for ranch life." "Maybe," Preston said, though the word stung, "but she is not as delicate as she looks. She has calluses on her hands, and she is not afraid to speak her mind. And when we sang together, it felt like something I have been missing my whole life suddenly clicked into place." Miguel studied him for a moment, his dark eyes serious. "Be careful, my friend. The heart is a powerful thing, but it can also blind us. Make sure you are seeing this woman for who she really is, not who you want her to be." "I know," Preston said, appreciating the advice even though part of him wanted to reject it. "But I have to at least try. What if she is the one?" "What if she is?" Miguel agreed. "Then you would be a fool not to pursue her. Just take your time, get to know her properly. And maybe do not scare her off with talk of cattle drives until she has had a chance to adjust to the West." Preston grimaced, remembering his impulsive offer. "Too late for that. I already asked her to come on the drive next month." Miguel's eyebrows shot up. "You did what?" I know," Preston said, holding up his hands defensively. "It was stupid, but you should have seen her with the cattle, Miguel. It was like magic." Well, if she agrees, Rosa will definitely want to come along as chaperone, Miguel said. She has been curious about this Boston teacher anyway. Says she wants to make sure the woman teaching our children is someone worth respecting. Preston nodded. Miguel and Rosa had 3 children, ranging in age from 6 to 12, and Rosa took their education very seriously. If Lillian won Rosa's approval, that would mean more than almost anything else. Sunday could not come fast enough. Preston spent Saturday scrubbing himself raw in the bathhouse in town, getting a shave and a haircut, and even buying a new shirt from the general store. He felt ridiculous, primping like a schoolboy, but he wanted to make a good impression. When he arrived at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house Sunday afternoon, his palms were sweating despite the dry Arizona heat. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding, and was greeted by a stern-looking woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. "You must be Mr. York," she said, looking him up and down with a critical eye. "Lillian said you would be calling. I am Mrs. Henderson. Come in, but mind your manners. I run a respectable house." "Yes, madam," Preston said, removing his hat and stepping inside. The house was neat and clean, smelling faintly of beeswax and lavender. Mrs. Henderson led him to a small parlor where Lillian sat waiting, wearing a dress of soft green that made her eyes look even more vibrant. She stood when he entered, her smile warm and genuine. "Preston, I am so glad you came." "I would not have missed it," he said, drinking in the sight of her. She looked different here, more at ease than she had out on the range, but no less beautiful. "I will be in the kitchen," Mrs. Henderson announced pointedly. "The door stays open, and I expect you to maintain a proper distance." "Of course," Preston and Lillian said in unison, then laughed at their synchronization. Once Mrs. Henderson had left, though Preston could hear her banging around in the kitchen, clearly making sure they knew she was nearby. He sat down across from Lillian in an uncomfortable chair that had probably been designed specifically to discourage young men from overstaying their welcome. "You look lovely," Preston said, then worried that was too forward. But Lillian's smile only grew. "Thank you. You clean up quite nicely yourself. I have only seen you covered in trail dust." "The hazard of ranching," Preston said, "though I do try to maintain basic hygiene." They both laughed, and Preston felt himself relaxing. They talked about easy things at first, their childhoods, their favorite books, the differences between Boston and Arizona territory. Lillian told him about growing up as an only child to parents who valued education above all else, about her father's bookshop and her mother's garden. Preston shared stories of growing up on a small farm in Texas, of losing his parents to fever when he was 16, of making his own way in the world. "I am sorry about your parents," Lillian said softly. "It must have been difficult, losing them so young." "It was," Preston admitted. "But it taught me to be self-sufficient, to build something for myself. That is why the Circle Y means so much to me. It is proof that I survived, that I made something of my life despite everything." "I understand that," Lillian said. "When my father died, I felt lost. The bookshop went to his brother, and I suddenly realized I had nothing that was truly mine. Coming here, taking this teaching position, it is my way of building something for myself." Preston leaned forward, drawn by the passion in her voice. "How are you finding it so far? Teaching, I mean." "School has not started yet, but I have met some of the families, and I am both excited and terrified," Lillian confessed. "I want to do right by these children, to give them the education they deserve. But I worry I am too different, too Eastern, to really understand what they need." "You will be wonderful," Preston said with certainty. "Anyone who cares as much as you do is already halfway there." They talked for over 2 hours, the conversation flowing as easily as their voices had harmonized that evening with the cattle. Preston told her about the ranch, about his dreams of expanding the herd, maybe even breeding better quality cattle. Lillian talked about wanting to start a lending library in Holbrook, about the books she had brought with her from Boston that she hoped to share. Finally, as the afternoon light began to fade, Preston knew he had to bring up the subject that had been hovering between them. "Have you given any more thought to my offer, about the cattle drive?" Lillian nodded slowly. "I have thought about little else, to be honest. It is such an unusual opportunity and part of me is very tempted. But Preston, I have to consider my reputation. A single woman traveling with a group of men, even with your foreman's wife along as chaperone, people will talk." "I know," Preston said. "And I would never want to do anything that would damage your standing in the community. Your teaching position is too important." "But," Lillian continued, "I have also realized that I did not come all the way to Arizona to play it safe. I came here to live, truly live in a way I never could in Boston, and singing to your cattle, feeling that connection to something wild and free, it called to something deep inside me." Preston's heart began to beat faster. "Does that mean you will come?" "It means I want to," Lillian said carefully. "But I need to meet your foreman's wife first, make sure she is comfortable with the arrangement. And I want to be very clear about the boundaries and expectations. I will not be made a fool of, Preston." "You have my word," Preston said solemnly. "This is about your talent, about helping with the cattle. Nothing more, unless you want it to be." The air between them crackled with tension at those last words. Lillian held his gaze for a long moment, and Preston saw his own confusion and attraction reflected in her eyes. "I think I should meet Rosa as soon as possible," Lillian said finally, "before I let myself get any more invested in this idea." "How about tomorrow?" Preston suggested. "I could bring her into town and the three of you could have lunch. You, Rosa, and Mrs. Henderson." Lillian's eyes lit up. "That would be perfect. If Mrs. Henderson gives her approval and if Rosa and I get along, then I will feel much better about the whole arrangement." They talked a bit more before Preston reluctantly took his leave. As he rode back to the ranch, he found himself grinning like a fool. It was not a firm yes, but it was not a no either. And more importantly, he had just spent 2 hours in Lillian's company and come away more certain than ever that she was someone special. The next day, Preston brought Rosa into town, explaining the situation on the way. Rosa, a handsome woman with dark hair streaked with silver and warm brown eyes, listened carefully. "So you want this Boston teacher to come on the cattle drive," she said when he finished, "and you want me to chaperone her." "I know it is a lot to ask," Preston said. "But Rosa, when I tell you the effect her singing has on the cattle, you will understand." "I am sure I will," Rosa said dryly. "But Preston, be honest with me. Is this really just about the cattle?" Preston sighed. He should have known he could not fool Rosa. She had a way of seeing through everyone's nonsense. "No," he admitted. "It is not just about the cattle. There is something about her, Rosa, something that feels right." Rosa's expression softened. "Then you should court her properly, not drag her along on a cattle drive as a hired hand. She is a lady, Preston, a schoolteacher. She deserves to be treated with respect. I know, and I am courting her or trying to. But Rosa, I think she needs this. She needs to feel connected to the land, to understand the life out here. It is important to her." Rosa studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. If she and I get along and if she truly wants to come, I will chaperone. But Preston, you treat her right. You understand me. No taking advantage, no inappropriate behavior. If I see anything that concerns me, she and I are riding straight back to town." "Understood," Preston said, grateful and slightly intimidated. Rosa was a force to be reckoned with when she wanted to be. The lunch was held at the town's only proper restaurant, a small establishment run by a German couple who served surprisingly good food. Preston made introductions, then excused himself, knowing his presence would only make things more awkward. He spent a restless 2 hours at the general store, pretending to look at supplies he did not need while wondering how the lunch was going. Finally, he saw the 3 women emerge from the restaurant, and from the smiles on their faces, he knew things had gone well. Rosa found him at the general store a few minutes later. "I like her," she announced without preamble. "She is smart, practical, and she has a good head on her shoulders. More importantly, she is honest about her inexperience and willing to learn." "So you will chaperone?" Preston asked hopefully. "I will," Rosa confirmed. "But Preston, I meant what I said. You treat her right. That woman has been through enough, losing her father and leaving everything she knew behind. She does not need some cowboy breaking her heart because he could not keep his feelings in check." "I would never hurt her," Preston said fiercely. "Rosa, I think I am falling in love with her." Rosa's eyebrows rose. "After knowing her for less than a week." "I know how it sounds," Preston said, "but when we sang together that first night, something clicked. Like I had been waiting my whole life to find her." Rosa's expression softened. "Then court her properly. Bring her flowers, take her to church socials, let the whole town see that you respect her. And maybe, just maybe, by the time the cattle drive comes around, you will know if what you are feeling is real or just infatuation." Preston took Rosa's advice to heart. Over the next 2 weeks, he courted Lillian with a dedication that surprised even himself. He brought her wildflowers from the prairie, took her on properly chaperoned buggy rides, and attended church with her every Sunday. They sang together in the church choir, and once again Preston felt that incredible harmony, that sense of rightness when their voices blended. The town took notice, of course. In a small place like Holbrook, everything was noticed and discussed. Some people were supportive, seeing Preston as a successful rancher and good match for the schoolteacher. Others were more skeptical, wondering if a woman from Boston could really adjust to the harsh realities of ranch life. Lillian faced her own challenges. School started, and she threw herself into teaching with a passion that impressed even her harshest critics. She had 30 students ranging from age 6 to 16, and she treated each one with respect and genuine interest. She brought new teaching methods from back east, but was smart enough to adapt them to Western sensibilities. Preston found excuses to visit the schoolhouse, bringing supplies he claimed Rosa had sent, or stopping by to fix a shutter that did not actually need fixing. Each time, he was struck by how natural Lillian looked standing in front of the class, how the children responded to her gentle but firm guidance. One afternoon, about a week before the planned cattle drive, Preston arrived at the school just as classes were letting out. He waited outside, watching the children stream past, many of them calling out goodbyes to their teacher. When the last student had left, he entered to find Lillian erasing the chalkboard. "Preston," she said, turning with a smile that made his heart skip. "What brings you by?" "I wanted to talk about the drive," he said, suddenly nervous. "It is only a week away, and I need to know for certain if you are still planning to come." Lillian set down the eraser and faced him fully. "I am coming," she said firmly. "I have been practicing, singing to animals whenever I get the chance. Mrs. Henderson thinks I am losing my mind, but I want to be prepared." Preston grinned. "Have you been singing to Mrs. Henderson's chickens again?" "They seem to appreciate it," Lillian said defensively, but her eyes sparkled with humor. "And I will have you know that one of her hens has started laying double her normal amount of eggs." "Then maybe I should hire you permanently," Preston said, moving closer. "As the official Circle Y cattle singer." "Is that a real position?" Lillian asked, laughing. It could be, Preston said softly. They were standing close now, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her green eyes, could smell the chalk dust and lavender that seemed to always cling to her. Lillian, I need to tell you something. What is it? She asked, her voice equally soft. This past couple of weeks, getting to know you, it has been the best time of my life, Preston said, his heart pounding. You are brilliant and brave and beautiful, and every time we sing together, I feel like I have found the other half of my soul. I know it is fast, maybe too fast, but I am falling in love with you. Lillian's eyes widened, and for a moment Preston feared he had ruined everything by speaking too soon. But then her face broke into a radiant smile. Preston York, I am falling in love with you too. It terrifies me how quickly it has happened, how deeply I feel it. But I cannot deny it any more. Preston cupped her face gently, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. When she did not, when instead she leaned into his touch, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was soft and sweet, a promise more than a demand, and when they finally pulled apart they were both breathless. That was my first kiss, Lillian whispered. Preston felt a surge of something primal and possessive. I am honored, he said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. And if I have my way, it will be the first of many. You are very confident, Mr. York, Lillian teased, but she was still standing close, her hands resting on his chest. I am when it comes to you, Preston said. I know what I want, Lillian. I want you by my side today, tomorrow, forever. I want to build a life with you, here in Arizona. I want our voices to harmonize for the rest of our lives. That is quite a declaration, Lillian said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. But Preston, we barely know each other. What if this is just infatuation? What if the reality of ranch life is too much for me? What if I disappoint you? You could never disappoint me, Preston said firmly. And yes, we have only known each other for a short time, but sometimes you just know. My father used to say that he knew he was going to marry my mother the moment he saw her. I always thought he was exaggerating, but now I understand. Sometimes love does not need time, it just needs recognition. Lillian leaned her forehead against his chest and Preston wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. I want to believe that, she murmured. I want to believe this is real. Then come on the cattle drive, Preston said. Spend a week living the ranch life, seeing what it is really like. If you still feel the same way at the end of it, then we will know this is real. Lillian pulled back and looked up at him. All right, she said, but Preston, I need you to promise me something. Anything, he said without hesitation. Promise me you will be honest with me always. If you see that I am not cut out for this life, if you realize I am not the woman you thought I was, promise me you will tell me. I would rather have my heart broken by the truth than live a lie. Preston took her hands in his, holding them tightly. I promise, and I want the same from you. If you realize this is not the life you want, that I am not the man you thought I was, tell me. I will let you go if that is what you need, even if it kills me. They sealed the promise with another kiss, deeper this time and full of hope and longing. The week before the cattle drive was a flurry of preparations. Preston and his men gathered the 200 head they would be driving to the railroad, checked equipment, and organized supplies. Lillian arranged for a substitute teacher to cover her classes for the week, endured Mrs. Henderson's disapproving looks, and tried to figure out what exactly one wore on a cattle drive. Rosa came to her rescue, arriving at the boarding house with a split skirt, practical blouse, and a sturdy pair of boots. You cannot wear those fancy dresses on the trail, Rosa said bluntly. You would ruin them in a day. These belonged to my sister before she moved to California. They should fit you well enough. Lillian held up the split skirt, marveling at the practicality of it. Thank you, Rosa, for everything. I know you are taking a risk agreeing to chaperone me." Rosa sat down on Lillian's bed, her expression serious. "I am not doing it just for Preston, though God knows that man needs someone to keep him in line. I am doing it for you too. I see something in you, Lillian, a strength you maybe do not even know you have. This cattle drive, it will test you, but I think you will surprise yourself." "I hope you are right," Lillian said, "because Preston deserves someone who can handle this life, and I am not sure I am that person." "None of us are sure until we try," Rosa said. "I was a city girl myself, from Santa Fe. When I married Miguel, I had never even seen a cow up close. But I learned, and so will you, if this is what you truly want." The morning of the cattle drive dawned clear and bright. Lillian dressed in her new practical clothes, braided her hair to keep it out of the way, and met Preston and the rest of the crew at the edge of town just as the sun was rising. There were 5 men besides Preston and Miguel. Tom, a grizzled old cowboy who had been working cattle since before Lillian was born. Jack and his younger brother Sam, 2 eager young men from a farm outside town. Carlos, a quiet man with gentle hands and a gift for handling the most difficult horses, and a Cherokee man named Daniel who served as the crew's tracker and guide. They all treated Lillian with polite respect, though she could see the curiosity and skepticism in their eyes. A woman on a cattle drive was unusual enough, but a fancy schoolteacher from Boston singing to the cattle. She could only imagine what they were thinking. Preston had prepared a gentle mare for her to ride, a sweet-tempered animal named Daisy who seemed to sense Lillian's nervousness and compensated by being extra steady. Rosa rode beside her as they set out, the cattle forming a long, lowing line ahead of them. "First cattle drive?" Rosa asked with a knowing smile. "Is it that obvious?" Lillian replied, gripping the reins perhaps a bit too tightly. "You will relax once we get into the rhythm of it," Rosa assured her. "Just follow my lead and do not be afraid to ask questions." The first day was harder than Lillian had imagined. The heat was oppressive. The dust was everywhere, coating her throat and making her eyes water, and the hours in the saddle left her sore in places she had not even known existed. But when evening came and the cattle began to get restless, Preston rode up to her with an expectant look. "This is when we could use your gift," he said. "They are tired and anxious, worried about the new surroundings. Your voice could calm them." Lillian nodded, her throat dry from the dust. She took a long drink from her canteen, then urged Daisy closer to the herd. She began to sing, starting with the same melody she had sung that first night, but this time she let the song evolve, adding verses about the journey, about the strength of the herd, about finding rest at the end of a long day. The effect was immediate and remarkable. The cattle, which had been milling about restlessly, began to settle. Some lay down, others simply stood peacefully, their dark eyes calm. The cowboys stopped their work to listen, and Lillian saw more than one hardened face soften with emotion. Then Preston joined her, his rough voice blending with hers in that perfect harmony they had discovered. Together they sang the sun down, their voices carrying across the prairie. When they finally fell silent, the cattle were peaceful, and the crew was staring at them with something like awe. "Well, I will be damned," Tom said, shaking his head. "I have been working cattle for 40 years, and I have never seen anything like that." "Told you she was special," Preston said, his eyes never leaving Lillian's face. That night, as they sat around the campfire eating Rosa's stew, the crew loosened up around Lillian. Tom told stories of cattle drives past. Jack and Sam competed to make her laugh with increasingly ridiculous tales, and Daniel shared stories of his people's relationship with the land that left her in awe of the depth of knowledge being lost as the tribes were pushed onto reservations. Preston sat beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body in the cool night air. When she shivered, he draped his coat around her shoulders without a word, and the gesture felt more intimate than any kiss. The days fell into a rhythm. Up before dawn, a quick breakfast, then long hours in the saddle as they pushed the cattle north toward the railroad. Lillian sang twice a day, once in the morning to get the cattle moving and once at night to settle them down. Each time Preston joined her, and each time their voices harmonized more perfectly, as if they were learning each other's musical language. On the third night, a storm rolled in. Lightning split the sky and thunder boomed like cannon fire. The cattle, spooked by the noise and the sudden gusts of wind, began to stampede. Lillian watched in horror as 200 head of beef suddenly became a mindless, panicking mass of muscle and horn. "Stay back!" Preston shouted at her as he and the other men raced to try to turn the herd, to keep them from scattering completely. But Lillian could not just sit back and do nothing. Without thinking, she urged Daisy forward and began to sing. Her voice could barely be heard over the thunder and the pounding of hooves, but she sang anyway, projecting as loudly as she could. She sang about safety, about calm waters and peaceful meadows, about trust and steadiness. The cattle nearest to her began to slow, their panic easing, and she pushed Daisy forward, getting closer to the main body of the herd. Preston appeared at her side, his face a mask of fear and anger. "Lillian, get back. You could be killed." But instead of retreating, she grabbed his hand. "Sing with me. They need both our voices." For a moment she thought he would refuse, would drag her to safety whether she wanted to go or not. But then he opened his mouth and joined her song, his voice strong and sure even in the chaos. Together they rode along the edge of the stampeding herd, their voices rising above the storm, and slowly, miraculously, the cattle began to calm. It took hours, and by the end both Lillian and Preston were hoarse and exhausted. But the stampede was stopped, the cattle were intact, and not a single animal had been lost. The crew looked at them like they had performed some kind of miracle. "That was the stupidest, bravest thing I have ever seen," Miguel said to Lillian as they finally made camp in the early hours of the morning. "You could have been trampled." "I know," Lillian said, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off, "but I could not just stand by and watch." Preston, who had been seeing to the horses, overheard. He stalked over to Lillian, his face dark with emotion. "You could have died," he said, his voice rough. "Lillian, when I saw you ride into that stampede, I thought my heart would stop." "But I did not die," Lillian said, standing her ground even though she was trembling. "And together we stopped the stampede. Preston, that is what we can do together. Alone our voices are good, but together they are powerful enough to calm a storm." The anger drained from Preston's face, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. "I cannot lose you," he said quietly. "I have only just found you." "Then do not let me go," Lillian whispered. Preston pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly despite the watching crew. "Never," he promised. "I will never let you go." Rosa cleared her throat meaningfully, and Preston reluctantly released Lillian, but not before pressing a kiss to her forehead. The crew tactfully turned away, pretending to be busy with various tasks. The rest of the drive was mercifully uneventful. They reached the railroad town of Flagstaff 6 days after leaving Holbrook, and the cattle were loaded onto trains bound for markets back east. Preston settled accounts with the buyers, paid his crew, and distributed bonuses all around for a successful drive. "What you going to do with your share, Miss Lillian?" Jack asked as they prepared for the ride back to Holbrook. "Put it toward books for the school," Lillian said immediately. "The children need more resources, and this will help tremendously." The crew nodded approvingly. She had passed their test, proven herself capable and brave. More than that, she had shown she cared about their community, that she was not just playing at Western life. The ride back was easier, faster without the cattle to slow them down. Preston rode beside Lillian, and they talked about everything and nothing. He told her more about his plans for the ranch, about wanting to improve the herd through selective breeding, about maybe one day having enough land to run 1,000 head or more. Lillian shared her own dreams, about building a proper school building with multiple rooms, about starting a library, about helping the women in town learn to read if they wanted to. Some of her ideas were radical for the time and place, but Preston listened with genuine interest, asking questions and offering support. "You really think you could be happy here?" he asked as they made camp on their last night before reaching Holbrook. "It is so different from Boston, from everything you knew." Lillian looked around at the vast open sky, at the prairie stretching endlessly in all directions, at the faces of people who had become friends over the past week. "Boston never felt like home," she said slowly. "It was where I lived, but it never felt like where I belonged. But here, Preston, here I feel like I have finally found my place. The land speaks to something in my soul." "And what about me?" Preston asked, his voice low. "Do I speak to something in your soul?" Lillian turned to face him fully. They were sitting apart from the others, on the edge of the firelight, maintaining the propriety that Rosa insisted upon. But there was nothing proper about the way Lillian's heart raced when she looked at Preston, nothing restrained about the emotion in her eyes. "You speak to everything in my soul," she said. "Preston, I have never been in love before. I do not have experience to compare this to. But I know that when I am with you, I feel complete in a way I never have before. When we sing together, our voices harmonizing, it feels like the most natural thing in the world, like we were made to blend together." Preston reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. "Marry me, Lillian." "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other for a month, but I know what I feel. I love you with everything I am, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning, sing with you every evening, and build a life together right here in Arizona. Will you marry me?" Lillian felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Preston, I will marry you. I love you, and I want all of those things too." Preston stood and pulled her to her feet, spinning her around in a circle as the rest of the camp erupted in cheers. Rosa was crying happy tears. Miguel was slapping Preston on the back, and the rest of the crew was whooping and hollering. "About damn time," Tom said, grinning broadly. "We have been watching you two dance around each other all week. Figured you would either kill each other or get married." "When?" Rosa asked practically. "And where?" "Oh, there is so much to plan. Soon," Preston said, looking at Lillian for confirmation. "If Lillian agrees, I would like to marry her as soon as possible. I have waited my whole life to find her. I do not want to wait any longer than necessary." 2 weeks. Lillian suggested. "That should give us enough time to make basic arrangements and for me to write to my aunt in Boston. She is my only living family, and I would like her to know, even if she cannot be here." 2 weeks it is, Preston agreed. They rode into Holbrook the next afternoon to a town buzzing with excitement. News had apparently traveled ahead of them, courtesy of a couple of riders who had passed their camp, and everyone knew that the rancher Preston York and the schoolteacher Lillian Crawford were engaged. Mrs. Henderson was waiting on her porch when Lillian arrived, her expression unreadable. "So it is true then," she said. "You are going to marry Preston York?" "I am," Lillian said, bracing herself for disapproval. Instead, Mrs. Henderson smiled, a genuine warm smile that transformed her stern face. "Good. That man has been lonely too long, and you need someone steady and true. He is a good man, Lillian. He will treat you right. Over the next 2 weeks, the entire town threw themselves into wedding preparations. Rosa organized the women to make food for the reception. The men constructed an arbor for the ceremony in front of the church, and Lillian found herself at the center of more attention than she had received in her entire life. She wrote a long letter to her Aunt Margaret in Boston, explaining everything that had happened. She tried to make her aunt understand how she had fallen in love so quickly, how Arizona had claimed her heart as surely as Preston had. She did not expect her aunt to approve, but she hoped she would at least understand. Preston spent those 2 weeks finishing up a surprise for Lillian. He had been secretly building an addition onto his ranch house, creating a proper bedroom and a study where Lillian could keep her books and prepare her lessons. He wanted her to have her own space, to know that his home was truly their home. He also rode out to his favorite spot on the ranch, a small rise where you could see for miles in every direction, and built a bench. He imagined sitting there with Lillian in the evenings, watching the sun set and singing together, their voices carrying across the land they would share. The night before the wedding, Preston stayed in town at the hotel as tradition demanded. He spent a restless night, alternating between excitement and nerves. What if Lillian changed her mind? What if she realized she was making a mistake? What if he could not make her happy? Miguel, who was serving as his best man, found him pacing the hotel room at dawn. "She is going to marry you, hermano," Miguel said with amusement. "That woman rode into a stampede for you. I do not think she is going to run away from a wedding." "I just want everything to be perfect for her," Preston said. "She gave up so much to come west, left everything she knew behind. I need to make sure she never regrets choosing me." "Then spend the rest of your life showing her she made the right choice," Miguel advised. "But Preston, stop worrying so much. Anyone with eyes can see that woman loves you. The way she looks at you, the way your voices blend when you sing together, it is special. Do not question it, just be grateful for it." The wedding was set for 2 in the afternoon, giving everyone time to attend after morning chores were done. The church was packed, with seemingly everyone in Holbrook and the surrounding ranches in attendance. Preston stood at the front, his hands sweating and his heart pounding, waiting for Lillian to appear. Then the church doors opened, and there she was. She wore a simple white dress that Rosa had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves past her shoulders, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers picked fresh that morning. She looked beautiful, radiant, and when her eyes met Preston's, the whole world fell away. She walked down the aisle alone, having no father to give her away, but she did not look sad or lonely. She looked strong, confident, a woman choosing her own path. When she reached Preston, he took her hands in his, and they turned together to face the preacher. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They spoke their vows in clear, steady voices, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. And when the preacher said Preston could kiss his bride, Preston cupped Lillian's face tenderly and kissed her with all the love and promise he felt in his heart. The town had organized a reception in the town square, with tables of food, a fiddler providing music, and plenty of space for dancing. Preston and Lillian led the first dance, moving together in a simple waltz, their eyes locked on each other. But the moment everyone was waiting for came after the dancing, when Preston and Lillian stood together under the arbor and sang. They performed the song they had sung that first night, the one that had brought them together, but they had added new verses about finding home, about harmony, about 2 voices becoming one. Their voices rose together, perfectly blended and carried across the town square. People stopped talking, stopped eating, stopped everything to listen. It was magic, pure and simple, the kind of moment that would be remembered and spoken of for years to come. When the song ended, there was a moment of perfect silence, and then the entire town erupted in applause and cheers. Lillian and Preston stood there, still holding hands, and smiled at each other with pure joy. They left the reception as the sun was setting, riding out to the Circle Y together. Preston had sent most of his crew home for the night, wanting to be alone with his new wife. As they approached the ranch house, Lillian gasped at the sight of the addition. "When did you do this?" she asked, dismounting and running to explore. "I have been working on it for the past 2 weeks," Preston admitted. "I wanted you to have your own space, somewhere that felt like yours." Lillian explored the new rooms, running her hands over the shelves Preston had built for her books, the desk where she could work, the large window that looked out over the prairie. Tears streamed down her face, but they were happy tears. "It is perfect," she said, turning to embrace him. "Preston, everything is perfect." They spent their first night as husband and wife in their new home, talking and laughing and planning their future together. Preston told Lillian about wanting to expand the ranch, and she shared her ideas for the school. They talked until dawn, neither of them wanting to sleep, wanting to savor every moment of their first day as a married couple. The next morning, Preston woke before Lillian and lay watching her sleep, marveling at the fact that she was his wife, that she had chosen him. When she finally opened her eyes, he smiled at her. "Good morning, Mrs. York," he said softly. Lillian smiled back. "Good morning, my husband. I think I could get used to waking up like this." "You better," Preston teased, "because we have the rest of our lives to do it." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Lillian continued teaching, riding into town each morning and returning to the ranch each evening. Preston ran the ranch, but he made sure to be home for dinner every night, and they spent their evenings singing together, their voices rising into the Arizona sky. Rosa had been right about Lillian being stronger than she looked. She adapted to ranch life with determination and grace, learning to help with the animals, to cook on a wood stove, to handle the isolation that came with living miles from town. More than that, she thrived in it. The wide, open spaces that might have intimidated someone else invigorated her, and she found joy in the simplicity and honesty of ranch life. Preston, for his part, supported Lillian's teaching career completely. When she needed to stay in town for evening meetings with parents, he rode in to escort her home. When she wanted to start a Saturday reading program for the women in town, he helped her organize it. He was proud of his wife's intelligence and independence, and he made sure everyone knew it. The town came to love them as a couple. They were invited to every social gathering, and it became tradition for them to sing at community events. Their voices, harmonizing perfectly, became the sound of Hallbrook, a symbol of what was possible when two people truly complemented each other. As winter approached, Lillian discovered she was pregnant. She told Preston one evening as they sat on the bench he had built, watching the sunset. He was so overcome with joy that he could not speak for a full minute, just held her and felt the wonder of it all. "A baby," he finally managed to say. "Lillian, we are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Lillian asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Preston said. "I am grateful, amazed, terrified, and more in love with you than I thought possible." "When?" "Rosa thinks early summer," Lillian said. "I will need to stop teaching in the spring, but I can go back after the baby is born if we can find someone to watch him or her during the day." "We will figure it out," Preston assured her. "Together, we can figure out anything." The pregnancy was not easy. Lillian suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and as the baby grew, the heat of the approaching summer became increasingly difficult for her to bear. But Preston was there through all of it, holding her hair when she was sick, bringing her cool water and wet cloths on hot days, and singing to her when she could not sleep. In early June of 1874, Lillian gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him James Preston York, after Preston's father and Preston himself. The baby had his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair, and from the moment Preston held him, he was completely besotted. "Hello, little one," Preston whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I am your father, and I promise you I will spend every day of my life making sure you know how loved you are." Lillian, exhausted but radiant, smiled at the sight of her husband cradling their son. "He is perfect," she said softly. "Just like his mother," Preston replied. Rosa came to help for the first few weeks after the birth, showing Lillian how to care for the baby and helping with the household tasks that were impossible for a new mother to manage alone. Preston tried to be useful but mostly just got in the way, earning exasperated but affectionate looks from both women. As James grew, it became clear that he had inherited his parents' love of music. Even as an infant, he would calm immediately when Preston or Lillian sang to him, and by the time he was 6 months old, he was attempting to make his own musical sounds, little coos and babbles that tried to match the pitch of his parents' voices. "We are raising a musician," Lillian said with delight one evening as James gurgled along with their singing. "Of course we are," Preston said, kissing the top of his son's head. "How could he be anything else with parents like us?" Lillian returned to teaching when James was 8 months old, with Rosa agreeing to watch him during the day. It was hard leaving him, but Lillian loved teaching and missed her students. She found that balancing motherhood and her career was challenging but rewarding, and Preston supported her every step of the way. The Circle Y continued to prosper. Preston's careful breeding program was paying off, and his cattle were becoming known for their quality. He was able to hire more hands, expand his territory, and increase his herd size significantly. Within 2 years of their marriage, the Circle Y was one of the most successful ranches in the region. But Preston never lost sight of what was truly important. He always made time for Lillian and James, always put his family first. On Sunday afternoons, the three of them would ride out to the bench he had built, and they would sing together as the sun set, their voices carrying across the land. When James was 3 years old, Lillian became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1877, she gave birth to a daughter they named Grace Margaret York, after no one in particular but simply because they loved the name. Grace had her father's dark eyes and her mother's auburn hair, and she was loud from the moment she entered the world. "This one is going to keep us on our toes," Rosa predicted, and she was right. Grace was adventurous and bold, always getting into things she should not, always pushing boundaries. James, on the other hand, was quieter, more thoughtful, content to sit and listen to stories or help his mother in the garden. They were opposites in many ways, but they adored each other. As the children grew, Preston and Lillian made sure to pass on their love of music. They taught James and Grace to sing, to harmonize, to appreciate the power and beauty of voices blending together. The family would gather on the porch every evening, and their 4 voices would rise together, creating something beautiful and unique. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. There were challenges, of course. A particularly harsh winter in 1878 killed off part of the herd. A drought in 1880 made water scarce and tested everyone's endurance. James came down with scarlet fever when he was 7, and Lillian and Preston spent 3 terrifying days nursing him back to health. But through it all, they had each other. Their love deepened with each passing year, growing richer and more complex. They learned each other's moods and quirks, learned how to fight and make up, learned how to support each other through the good times and the bad. In 1882, when James was 8 and Grace was 5, Lillian became pregnant for a third time. This pregnancy was unexpected, as they had thought their family was complete, but it was no less welcome. In early 1883, Lillian gave birth to another boy, whom they named Matthew Daniel York, after no one in particular, but simply because the names felt right. Matthew was a perfect blend of his siblings, adventurous like Grace but thoughtful like James. He had Preston's smile and Lillian's nose, and from the moment he could make sounds, he was trying to sing. With 3 children, the ranch house felt crowded, so Preston built another addition, creating more bedrooms and expanding the living space. The Circle Y was now a sprawling operation, with multiple buildings and over a dozen hands working the land. Preston had achieved the dream he had set out with all those years ago, but he knew that none of it would mean anything without Lillian and the family they had built together. In the summer of 1885, Holbrook celebrated its 15th anniversary as an incorporated town, and the community organized a big celebration. There were races and contests, food and dancing, and of course, music. Preston and Lillian were asked to perform, and they decided to do something special. They gathered their children, now 11, 8, and 2, and together the 5 of them stood in front of the entire town and sang. They performed the song that Preston and Lillian had first sung together all those years ago, but they had adapted it to include parts for the children, creating a 5-part harmony that was breathtaking in its beauty and complexity. The town listened in stunned silence as the York family sang, their voices blending perfectly, creating something that was more than just music. It was love made audible, a family's bond expressed through harmony and melody. When they finished, there was not a dry eye in the crowd. People stood and applauded, many of them crying openly. The York family had become a symbol of what was possible in the West, of how love and determination and faith could create something beautiful and lasting. That night, after the children were asleep, Preston and Lillian sat on their porch, holding hands and looking out at the land they had built a life on. "You ever miss Boston?" Preston asked, a question he had not asked in years. Lillian thought about it for a moment, then shook her head. "No. I have not missed it in a very long time. This is my home, Preston. You and the children in this ranch, this is where I belong. This is where my heart is. I am so grateful I caught you singing to my cattle that night," Preston said softly. "It was the moment my life changed, the moment I found what I had been searching for without even knowing it." "I am grateful you joined my song," Lillian replied. "You could have just listened, but you took a chance. You opened your mouth and sang with me. That choice, that moment of bravery, it led to all of this." She gestured at the ranch, at the life they had built. "Our voices harmonized," Preston said, squeezing her hand. "And so did our hearts," Lillian finished. They sat there for a long time, holding hands and listening to the sounds of the night. Cattle lowing in the distance, crickets chirping in the grass, the soft whisper of wind through the prairie. And underneath it all, the steady beat of 2 hearts, forever in harmony. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. James grew into a serious young man with his mother's intelligence and his father's steady presence. He went off to university in 1891, determined to study agriculture so he could bring new ideas back to the ranch. Grace became a force of nature, a young woman who could ride and rope as well as any man and who had her mother's gift for teaching. She took over some of Lillian's classes when Lillian decided to cut back on her teaching hours. Matthew showed signs of becoming a gifted musician, his voice pure and strong, and he dreamed of traveling and performing. Preston and Lillian supported all their children's dreams while making sure they understood the importance of family and home. The Circle Y was now one of the largest ranches in northern Arizona, employing over 30 people and running thousands of head of cattle. But it was still a family operation at its heart, built on the foundation of love and hard work that Preston and Lillian had established. In 1895, James returned from university with a degree and a fiancée, a smart young woman named Sarah who had grown up on a ranch in Colorado. Preston and Lillian welcomed her into the family with open arms, and the wedding was held on the Circle Y in the spring of 1896. Grace fell in love with one of the ranch hands, a good man named Thomas, who treated her with respect and admiration. They were married in 1897, and they built a house on the far edge of the Circle Y property, choosing to stay close to family. Matthew, true to his dreams, left home at 18 to pursue a career in music. He traveled to San Francisco and then to New York, performing in theaters and concert halls, but he always came home for Christmas, bringing stories of his adventures and filling the ranch house with new songs. Preston and Lillian aged gracefully, their hair turning gray but their voices remaining strong. They still sang together every evening, their harmonies as perfect as they had been that first night under the Arizona stars. They were grandparents now, with James and Sarah providing them with 2 grandsons and a granddaughter, and Grace and Thomas adding twin boys to the family. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1898, the town threw them a celebration. Everyone from miles around came to honor the couple who had become such an integral part of the community. There were speeches and food and dancing, but the highlight of the evening came when Preston and Lillian stood together and sang. They performed the song that had brought them together, and their children joined them. And then their grandchildren, those old enough to sing, joined in as well. 3 generations of Yorks standing together, their voices blending in perfect harmony, creating something beautiful and lasting. As Preston looked around at his family, at the community they were part of, at the life he and Lillian had built together, he felt a profound sense of gratitude and peace. He had caught a woman singing to his cattle 25 years ago, and in joining her song, he had found everything he had ever wanted. Lillian caught his eye and smiled, and he knew she was thinking the same thing. Their voices had harmonized that night, and so had their hearts, and together they had created a life full of love, music, and joy. As they finished the song, their voices rising together one last time, Preston pulled Lillian close and kissed her in front of everyone. The crowd cheered, their children laughed, and somewhere in the distance, the cattle of the Circle Y lowed peacefully, still calmed by the music of the family who had made this harsh land their home. Preston and Lillian York had found each other through song, and they had lived their lives in harmony, their love growing stronger with each passing year. They had faced challenges and celebrated triumphs. They had raised children and built a legacy, and through it all, they had never lost sight of what mattered most, each other. As the celebration continued around them, Preston whispered in Lillian's ear, "I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "So would I," Lillian whispered back, "every single moment." And there, under the vast Arizona sky, surrounded by family and friends, their hearts beat in perfect harmony, just as their voices had from that very first night when a cowboy had caught a woman singing to his cattle and had dared to join her song. Years continued to unfold with the gentle rhythm they had established. In 1903, on a warm August evening much like the one where they first met 30 years before, Preston and Lillian rode out to their special bench on the rise. Their hair was white now, their hands weathered by decades of hard work, but their eyes still sparkled when they looked at each other. "You remember what I said that first night?" Lillian asked, leaning against Preston's shoulder as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "You said I was using my cattle to manipulate you," Preston replied with a chuckle. "And you asked if it was working," Lillian continued, laughing at the memory. "Oh, Preston, it worked better than either of us could have imagined." "Our whole life has been better than I could have imagined," Preston said, wrapping his arm around her. 3 children, 7 grandchildren, a successful ranch, and 30 years with the woman I love. What more could a man ask for? A song, Lillian suggested with a smile. Preston grinned. Always a song. They began to sing together. Their voices perhaps not as strong as they once were, but still perfectly in tune, still harmonizing in that magical way that had brought them together all those years ago. Their song floated across the prairie, carried by the evening breeze, and in the distance, the cattle of the Circle Y settled peacefully, still responding to the voices that had been singing to them for 3 decades. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear, Preston and Lillian continued to sing, their voices blending in the gathering darkness. Their hearts beat in harmony, just as they had from that first night, and their love remained as strong and true as the land beneath their feet. They had caught each other through song, had built a life through harmony, and had created a legacy that would echo through the generations. The Circle Y would continue, passed down to their children and grandchildren, and with it would go the story of how a cowboy and a schoolteacher had found love through music on a summer evening in Arizona. As they finished their song and sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one, Preston squeezed Lillian's hand. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" Lillian asked. "For singing to my cattle that night," Preston replied. "For letting me join your song. For saying yes to everything that came after. For being my partner, my love, my harmony." Lillian turned to face him, her eyes shining with tears and love. "Thank you for having the courage to sing with me, for building this life with me, for loving me through every season. You are my home, Preston York, and you always will be." They kissed then, a gentle kiss full of 30 years of love and partnership, and in that moment, everything was perfect. Their voices had harmonized, their hearts had harmonized, and together they had created a life that was more beautiful than any song could capture. As they finally stood to ride back to the ranch house, where their family waited, where their legacy lived on, they knew that their story was complete. It was a story of courage and love, of harmony and hope, of 2 people who had found each other through song and had spent their lives singing together. The stars shone bright above the Arizona prairie. The cattle settled peacefully for the night, and Preston and Lillian York rode home together, their hearts forever in harmony, their love eternal as the wide western sky above them.